So here I was struggling with sleep. At this point, I think I had gotten to a point where I hadn't slept for about 3 months,
Oh,
wide
wow.
awake, yes, at night.
That's
And
crazy.
it was crazy.
Action!
Hello, welcome everyone to the Spirit of Yoga. I'm Devdas from the Kashi Yoga Academy, and today's podcast we're fortunate to have Dr. Trupti Gokani, author, lecturer, board-certified neurologist, sharing about the power of Ayurveda. Such a privilege to have you, and it's also always such a joy. We've been fortunate to have Trupti in many of our Zoom calls, sharing in our community. Every single time you come, it's just such a joy in my heart, but also I feel like I always leave profoundly impressed. I leave just like, wow, your Ayurvedic wisdom is just like, woo, 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 woo. You just pull it so naturally and so beautifully. So yeah, such a privilege and a joy to have you with us. And
Thank you for having me. I'm so grateful and thankful to be here.
beautiful, beautiful. And so I think you often start with this amazing story about how did a board certified neurologist become an amazing Ayurvedic practitioner? How did those kind of two worlds blend into one world? And I would love to hear your story and your sharing about that.
Yes, it's a fascinating journey of life when we're moving in one direction, and oftentimes the trajectory of life changes, and I believe for us in many ways to help us
Right.
expand our awareness, right, and our knowledge.
Mm,
And
mm,
here I was in my first year of medical school, and I had always loved science, neuroscience, and mind and psychiatry. And in my first year, very first few months, of training, I started struggling with sleep issues. And I had gone to the Western doctor who said, "You're fine. Your labs are normal. You're healthy. You seem fine. Nothing wrong." And then I went to the therapist and she said, "Do you feel stressed?" And I said, "No, I don't feel stressed." And she checked off a few things and said, "You seem fine on my end. Your moods are good and there's no need for therapy." So here I was struggling with sleep. At this point, I think I had gotten to a point where I hadn't slept for about 3 months,
oh,
wide
wow.
awake, yes, at night.
That's
And
crazy.
it was crazy. I was in this kind of
Wow.
like fugue, honestly, a fugue
Yeah.
state, because I
Yeah.
would lay in the bed, eyes wide open, just lying there, say, "Oh, okay, watch the sunrise, watch, it get darker." I was such a bizarre time. I was in this
Yeah.
very unusual place. And eventually, because I just wanted something to help me, I ended up taking a medication to help me sleep. And that one medication, I had taken it for a few times. It got me into a sleep cycle, but yet the next day I was really tired. I didn't really
Yeah.
feel as if sleep was refreshing and restorative.
Yeah.
And then, as the universe would have it, I got into a car accident. Thank goodness I was okay and the person I hit was okay. Yet my reaction time was so slow that because of the medication was
Oh,
still in my
wow.
system, I said,
Wow.
"This isn't the direction for me to go."
Yeah.
So eventually, out of desperation, I made my way into the psychiatry office because I was looking for some deep answer to this. Like
Yeah.
there had to be something in my mind. I'm going to go to the psychiatrist and I'm going to get this answered, right? So I was actually very excited for this visit. I wanted to see the psychiatrist. The visit was about 10 minutes long. And in 10 minutes, I had a diagnosis of major depressive disorder and a prescription for Prozac. And it's those moments in time, and we've all had them, where my gut was telling me this wasn't the right answer. The questions they asked me: "Are you feeling low energy, low concentration, don't feel like doing things you previously enjoyed?" I was saying
Like,
yes to all of them
did you hear the part
because
about the fact that I didn't sleep for 3 months?
for 3 months, who wants to do anything? Who has enjoyment? Who has energy? And I remember thinking inside, I was trying to be really respectful, saying, "Did you hear me? Did you hear what I—" And it was such an interesting visit. And actually, it was that moment that completely transformed the way I looked at health and medicine. Because,
Wow.
see, I'd never actually seen a physician before. My dad was a doc.
Right.
He would always, like, if I needed a form to be filled out for school, he'd do the forms. I was
Right.
healthy,
Right.
so I was lucky. So this was my first time actually seeing a physician as a patient, as a medical
Wow.
student. What a
Wow.
juxtaposition. So in that
Yeah.
moment, I ripped up the prescription. I got to the car, not in front of him. I ripped up the prescription. I had the grace to walk out of there. And I said, I cannot believe that's all I get. And it was actually a very, he's a very kind man and very close friends with family. And I still absolutely respect him and then his work he does. It just didn't fit me. Didn't fit what I was looking for at that moment in time. And so I ripped up the prescription. I went the next day to the bookstore and entered the self-help section and started reading books on mind, body, and spirit. Lo and behold, came across Ayurveda, found it to be so powerful for myself. I learned the wisdom of Ayurveda, used it to kind of really bring myself back into balance, sleeping again within about a month. Have been a fantastic sleeper since then. No medications. I'm 52 and healthy. And when I finished my training in neurology, I went back and decided to certify. So that's the story. It's just an eye-opening, no pun intended, experience.
Yeah. Wow.
Right?
Utterly fantastic. I feel it's so beautiful. And wow, there's so many elements of just that story alone. But I feel like one question that I have for you that I feel like is very kind of prevalent in the modern world. I actually felt like before the like pandemic hit, I had this feeling that there was a quiet pandemic already happening, and the quiet pandemic was deterioration of people's nervous system from just stress and lifestyle. And I think it relates in some ways to also your experience. It's like there is some element of stress. It throws something off in the system. Something falls out of alignment, you could say. And then it can be really hard to put it back into alignment. So I think my question is, how does stress and kind of regulating the nervous system and coming back into balance, how is that seen in the science of Ayurveda?
Oh, so beautiful. And so, this concept of balancing ourselves and connecting with stress and knowing how to navigate in a world, it's challenging, as a human. We're exposed to so many different things and understanding where we are in alignment with the world around us. And so one of the most important things I did in my time with my insomnia when I discovered Ayurveda was start to evaluate, was I really stressed? Because remember that therapist had asked me if I was stressed and I had said no. And I started to open my eyes up to this idea that stress can manifest itself emotionally and physically. It can manifest in such a unique way that we often don't even know we're stressed when we're holding so much of it.
Yeah.
And often when you're in the midst of this time of an altered personality and you're in that stressed state, which is what I was in, if you ask me at that time, am I stressed? I'm going to say no, because this is all I know. That's the only world I understand, is that world.
Right.
So what got me to not believe that that was the best space for me to be in was to start to slow down. And that's actually when I started doing yoga. And I resisted it. I will be honest. I did not want to do yoga. I thought yoga was so boring and so slow. And I was a go-go moving, intense person.
Yeah.
I look back, it was the best thing I could have ever done, is to start some simple, basic, restorative breath, mind, body yoga in a gentle fashion. And what I realized then, and it took that time to say, wow, that personality that comes out, that individual that shows up, that person is not really who you are. And that is what I call the stress personality. That's that inauthentic self that comes up because it's protecting us from perceived danger.
Right.
And so I think with the pandemic and what we noticed even before, like you were saying, is that a lot of people were already entering in that false self, that false personality, in a way that they were crying out for help and yet didn't know where to turn. Because Western medicine doesn't have the answers. As a physician, I do prescribe meds still. I will say it doesn't have all the answers. We know that. And if you just depend on Western, just depend on that alone, it's not going to take you very far.
No.
And so the stress to me is this idea of it's our physiology that changes. We turn into an altered personality to kind of live in the world that we perceive as dangerous. And until we step out of that and kind of evaluate, it's like seeing the forest through the trees. You kind of have to step out and say, oh, look at that. then you can start to evaluate, okay, if I'm stressed, how it's showing up in my mind and body, and then how can I improve it? How can I reduce the
Right.
impact of stress on myself?
Right. It's very interesting you're sharing. I love it. I feel like you know, in my own kind of like family's case, it's always been interesting to me. My brother's a Western medical doctor, and I'm a yogi, and it's been totally clear to me my whole life. It's like what he studies is dis-ease. And if you're diseased, he can profoundly help you. And all of the Western medical system, if you're really like, profoundly diseased, yes. But what he used to tell me, and I found it really interesting, is like, he said, if I have a patient come and they have some very subtle thing and it's only happening sometimes and it's kind of coming and going, I don't even want to see them because like I'm not interested in the kind of subtle rebalancing of somebody's system. I'm interested in like when something's really wrong, come see me. And I felt like, wow, that's exactly the opposite of where we would come from as yogis, right? It's like, okay, if you have some subtle thing that's just happening, come talk to me.
Yes,
I want to hear
exactly.
all about it,
In detail. How did it start? Right. And
How
that's
did
the
it start?
disconnect
Yeah.
with Western and
Yeah.
Eastern. And it's, to me, it's like that. And we want to try to do preventative work in Western medicine. But how do we do prevent when the symptoms have gotten that severe?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's that subtle body awareness, that subtle shifting out of state. And I'm so grateful that as I started to shift out of state, because I was pretty healthy, I started to shift. I pulled back and said, hold tight,
Yeah.
there's something else going on here. And just taking something isn't going to be the answer for me.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty, is that we can use this model to fill in those gaps.
Definitely, definitely. And also like I feel like there's so much potential when you start to look at how to bring people back into the subtle balance, then hopefully many times you keep them from the larger imbalance.
Absolutely. And that subtle connection with
Mm.
your energetics and in Ayurveda is all about your energy body, which I know
Yeah,
for my Western friends, it feels a little woo-woo,
yeah,
energy. What, as you know, the idea that we are energetic beings, and
yeah,
the physical part of us is only really operated from that energetic, and to know what the energetic body is messaging you.
yeah,
And to me, it's like I mentioned to friends and family who are feeling a little uncomfortable with this Ayurvedic topic in Eastern medicine, and they ask me about the energy body. And I say, just imagine, and the subconscious mind, we talk about the subconscious program, for example. And I just say, well, just imagine when you're in the car and you start daydreaming, and then you end up in the grocery store parking lot.
yeah.
Something got you there. It wasn't your conscious mind that got you there, but you got there. You got there, didn't you? And you weren't really paying attention. And then we go into deeper, like, how about your heart beating? Are you paying attention to every single heartbeat? God forbid, if you did, you would be exhausted to have to count and
Exactly.
manage
Exactly.
that system.
Yeah, yeah. Or
It's
are
just
you the one that's choosing to digest or not digest your food?
exactly. I mean, can you imagine having that much responsibility? Thank goodness there is a program that's within us
Yeah,
that's operating
yeah.
without our conscious awareness. And that's where you
Mm,
start to tap into the cool energetics of us. It's that
mm,
side of us that you can't see. It's not
yeah,
tangible, but it's there.
yeah.
It surely is there.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I want to go back to something that you were saying earlier and just ask you kind of a follow-up question, which is that you mentioned that sometimes in a very stressful situation, you can kind of create a persona.
Mhm.
Um, and I wonder if in your mind that relates also just from your scientific background to the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system and the regulation of that. Do you have some sharing or experience about that? I'm curious.
Yeah, such an important area to discuss, because as we shift out of state and we go into that personality, oftentimes what happens is we become more sympathetic dominant. So the sympathetic is the fight or flight, when we're in
Yeah,
danger, blood pressure goes up, cortisol lifts, and you're just running from the bear. Blood flow shifts to the periphery, to your
yeah,
muscles, to
yeah,
run from
yeah.
danger.
Right.
Parasympathetic, rest, relax, reset. Blood flow comes back, shifts back to the internal organs, especially digestive system and reproductive system, and we're repairing and calming and resetting.
Yeah,
Cortisol comes down and we feel this sense of calm. So we often are in this kind of interesting polarity of going from sympathetic to parasympathetic. And as human beings, we often push that sympathetic state a little too much. And we
Yeah.
tend to move into stress
Yeah.
personality.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
state, whatever state that it presents, and Ayurveda, that we can go into that next of the different states. But when you go
Mm.
into state, you get stuck in a sympathetic drive state. And
Mm.
and the beauty of breath and yoga is to reset you, to bring you back
Yeah.
in to
Yeah.
nervous system balance, and you restore with that ujjayi breath and the different breathing
Yeah.
techniques. You
Yeah.
bring yourself back into that rest and reset. And
Yeah.
for that moment, at least as you're breathing and as you're practicing, you found you. You've kind of moved in closer, at least to you.
Mm. Yeah.
For some, it requires a lot more to get to that sense, you
Yeah.
know, and that's where we can go into the koshas even and talk about that. But the idea is you really, when you feel it, you know that this is that me, the balanced, harmonious me. And
Yeah.
that's the state that's actually really in alignment with the
Mm.
parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. And
Mm.
it's not that we don't want to turn off the sympathetic nervous system. I don't want
No,
you to
no,
think
no.
that it's just align and balance
Yeah.
the state.
And I feel like the way that the world is, many times, if you're kind of, even if you're balanced and you're sensitively aware, you sometimes see that you're subtly out of balance. The other day, I had a very strange situation. Something, usually I'm, in my absolute natural joy and presence walking through life, and something happened, and it didn't even seem to me like it was that big of a deal. But I went to my office and I had this feeling like, okay, I've got to lie down and do Shavasana. And I lied down and I could just feel that my heart was totally out of control. It was just racing, racing, racing. And I just spent kind of 5 minutes with my hand on my heart, just like, okay, like, let's try to get that back down to a natural level. Like, let's just try to get the heart to just relax. After kind of 5 minutes or whatever it was, 5, 10 minutes of Shavasana, I could feel absolutely relaxed and centered again. And then I sat back up and started working.
See? It's beautiful. And the beauty is that you allowed yourself the space to do that. And I just have to say, being in the Western busy world in a busy city
Yeah.
and those around us that are constantly in that state of being on,
Yeah.
they often don't give themselves a space to do that. And
Yeah.
for you and I know we honor it and value it. I'm sure many listening do. Yet I do find, at least when I talk to others, that they often think, gosh, if I could just take a break, if I could just do a breath, what's
Yeah.
stopping you? What's stopping you from doing that?
Yeah.
Whatever that project is, if you spend 5 minutes in breath, 5 minutes in nature, 5 minutes just grounding, you come back to that project and you're going to be much more efficient,
Definitely.
far more effective,
Yeah.
and whatever comes out is going to be even better.
Yeah.
And so we don't, what happens, it's fascinating, this whole blood flow and the sympathetic drive state is we start to become reptilian in even our words, our language, our actions. So
Mm.
if you're trying to get a project done and your heart is racing, whatever you're trying to accomplish, it just doesn't end up coming from the prefrontal cortex, which is that
Right.
higher level intuitive intellectual brain.
Right.
So to me, I'm always encouraging others, like, just because someone gives you a deadline doesn't mean you have to push into a state that isn't authentic to meet the
Yeah.
deadline and then accomplish the task that isn't fully accomplished.
I don't know if you saw this. There was recently some studies done in scientific studies done about learning, and what they did is they took somebody and they gave them a task that they'd never done before. I think they were taking people that were non-musical and they were teaching them how to play piano for the first time. And they had a kind of control group that was just learning how to play piano, and then they had a group that had an interval timer. And they basically set this interval timer random. Sometimes it was 5 minutes, sometimes it was 10 minutes, sometimes it was 15 minutes. And when it went off, they just had to close their eyes and just relax for a minute or 2 minutes. And they could actually scientifically prove that the people who had the interval timer learned faster and more effectively than the people who didn't. And,
Wow.
it's just kind of like, even from an
Wow.
absolutely, utterly practical standpoint, just, rest and recovery is essential part of the human experience. And yet somehow, like you said, deadlines and stress and all these things, and we kind of, you could say, forget. And you also mentioned kind of being in a city, and I feel like something that's also been interesting to me is that there are some recent studies that stress is more contagious than what we think.
Absolutely. Be careful who you spend time with.
The yogis have always said, right, the importance of community, the importance of
Community.
sangha,
Yes.
and
Satsang.
there really is something beautiful to it. So for many of us for many of our beautiful listeners who are here with us, they're yogis, and I've often heard you say that Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. And when I hear it, it always kind of brings some joy into my heart, because it feels like it's uh it's the art of rebalancing, right? But maybe you could say a few words about yoga and Ayurveda and how they can support one another, and how the practice can support one another.
Yes. And I believe at some level, this Vedic wisdom was all presented in a way to be kind of wrapped and packaged together so we
Yes,
could be our
exactly.
most optimal selves. And
Yeah.
when we look at how these work together, to me, Ayurveda is a stepping stone to becoming a yogini and evolving in the yogic
Mm,
practice,
mm,
because Ayurveda truly is a science of health and longevity. How can we
yeah.
be as healthy as we can for as long as we can? It's really the understanding of what it takes to be aligned. And the beauty of Ayurveda, these five elements: air, space, fire, earth, and water, that make up every single one of us, is getting a sense of understanding which of those elements really create me as my persona, as my nature. Am I
Mm,
more the air and space element, windy, going, moving kind of personality, loves to talk, creative, artistic? Am I more the fire, water, kind of more intense and competitive, love to speak and direct and be in charge of things? I'm more the kapha, earthy and water individual that's more grounded. Maybe I have a little bit of a bigger frame. I'm a little bit more relaxed in my nature. The beauty of Ayurveda is that each and every one of us has a nature. And
mm.
yet the challenge of Ayurveda is that we often don't know what that is.
Right.
That's the biggest problem. And we end up, unfortunately, moving in a way, in a direction in life where we pull ourselves out of alignment. And so, as you were saying, when you think about how we take Ayurveda and look at yoga, it is essential, I believe, to get to know who you are. When you think of it was Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. I
Yeah.
believe you kind of have to examine you and then go to the mat. I find that that would be really
Mm,
beneficial for a lot of listeners and those that are practicing
mm,
yoga. Are you more the wind energy personality? Are you more the fire or pitta kind of personality? Are you more the earthy kapha type? And depending on you, first thing, you may be drawn to certain types of practice.
mm.
Example, if I'm the vata, moving, going, I might have a thinner frame, like to move, love vinyasa flow, yet I also have a little anxiety. I get a little stressed easily. I tend to have constipation, gas and bloating. That's all part of that wind energy state when it's out of alignment. For me, then vinyasa flow would actually not be that beneficial for me personally.
Right,
And
right.
maybe my best way of teaching is to understand that I'm a vata. I am drawn to flowing, and yet I'm going to teach a more grounding practice to balance me and to
Mm,
balance all of you that are struggling with this too. So your message can actually kind of fall into where you are. If you're
right.
a balanced vata and you love to flow and that's something you like to do, by all means, as long as it's keeping you in alignment and your students in alignment, it's great. The
Mm,
pitta, very big area for me because I do a lot of migraine work. That's been my specialty for
right.
about 2 decades. Migraine is often a wind and fire imbalance. Nerves get excitable, then they become inflamed and heated. And so what happens, they get neck pain, and oftentimes the migraines come, light sensitivity. Fire gives you challenges with your eyes. So too much fire energy, you start to have heat and irritability in the body. And what happens is if you go into a hot class or you're doing poses where you're doing a lot of core or holding that down dog really intensely, you might actually find that the yoga, if it's done with intensity and heat, especially heated mind, perfectionism, may actually create more imbalance in your state.
Right.
So if there's a yoga practitioner that is drawn to that, we often are drawn to our leading dosha. So
Yeah.
I may be a pitta that's drawn to spicy foods, but that doesn't mean
Right.
it's good for me. And so we got to be careful. We're drawn, but then
Yeah.
we have to back
Yeah.
off sometimes. The kapha tends to like the restorative and slow flow. They don't want to move too much because they're earthy.
Right.
Chill. Let's just breathe all class, But maybe you should be doing some more sun salutations. Let's get going, okay? And so you're gonna get too heavy and congested and depressed. So what's
Yeah.
kind of cool is if you get to know you, you can then apply it to the mat, and you can apply it to who
Right.
you're drawn to attract. And
Right.
in that way, yoga and Ayurveda. But the beauty of Ayurveda is if you start to connect with yourself first, start to work on your diet and your digestion, because Ayurveda is all about the six tastes: sweet, sour,
Mm.
salty, bitter, pungent, astringent. Get some foods going that have all those six tastes, and then start to eat in accordance with the circadian rhythm,
Yeah.
making sure you have 3 meals a day. Lunch is your biggest meal. Then you start to bring in, once your physical body is feeling better, the energetic body feels better. Now you can really practice yoga, the asanas and the
Yeah.
breath and the mind work. But see, if I'm holding disharmony of state, and I start to
Yeah.
practice, or I'm going to choose practices that don't suit me
Right. Right.
because
Right.
I'm not quite, see how that journey kind of happens. And I've noticed that over the years, what happens, we don't know ourselves. We start doing things. We choose classes, we choose people, we choose things that don't balance us. We get out of state and we want to kind of find the answers with doing some more yoga and breath work, but we didn't get to know ourselves first. So
Right.
we don't
Right.
know what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's really truth to what you're sharing. And even I think back to the topic of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, like I was just saying to a group of people the other day on a Zoom call, it's like yoga should take you into your parasympathetic nervous system. You should be in shavasana. You should feel the joy and the natural presence of your heart. But there's no guarantee of that, right?
Right.
An improperly taught yoga class does not necessarily put you into your resting state, right? It can put you
Right.
much more into your fight and flight state. And I feel like
Right.
people who are kind of in that state and stressed and tense, they actually often enjoy that kind of class, actually.
They're drawn to it,
Like,
right?
this is like my work. I just keep going.
This is my, well, I have this one friend of mine who teaches, this friend that teaches these boot camp classes. And she's like, I believe the people that come to my class have this sense that they have to abuse themselves. Like they come in ready to be like yelled at and ready to be screamed. And she's like, that's just kind of a personality thing I'm noticing. And it's actually concerning me. Why is that? Why do they feel
Right.
like to be abused and yelled at during class? And no, and yoga was never meant, right? It was
No.
meant to really bring us into connection with self, so then we can connect with the universe. And
Yeah.
if I'm not even connected with me because I'm doing something that's totally disconnecting and turning on my adrenals and
Yeah.
turning on the stress personality we talked about, then good luck trying to connect with divine or anyone else you want to connect with,
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
yeah.
Or even make a good decision about what's right for you, what to eat, it's like when you're in that profound state of disconnect, it's very difficult. There was a woman the other day on one of our Zoom calls. I was so touched. She said, there's just a lot of stress in my life right now, and I can feel it manifesting in my body, and it's hard to practice yoga and meditate. And it was like, yeah, like that's the site. That's how the whole thing happens, right?
And it's twofold with that, because you got me thinking about something there, because it's such a challenging thing when you hear that, right? Because that individual, God bless, really would benefit from allowing some of this practice into her life. Yet at some level, when the stress is there, it's hard to settle in to that
Yeah.
physical being of that stressed body. And so it's a dichotomy of, what do? I know I need it, but I can't really get to it, and yet at the end of the day, when we look at that stress physiology, it is a physiology that is requesting to be relieved. It isn't,
Yeah.
the system does not want to stay there.
Yes.
The
No.
system doesn't enjoy that space.
Mm.
And, we kind of joke around and say, we resist what we need the most, right? And it's so true. And so I often just encourage, just even starting with, even if it's 20 seconds, 30 seconds of just being in a quiet mind and listening to something, or going for a walk and connecting with nature. And then maybe after the walk, you might feel a little bit more ready to do a couple of poses or a couple of breath techniques. And, though it's because the more we fall off of that, alignment, it's harder to get back. It's harder and harder to get back, right?
Definitely.
And
One
the
of my
beauty is that this practice is gentle, so hopefully many can approach it in a different way. But go ahead, yeah.
beautiful. One of my teachers used to make a joke. You were saying, it's kind of fast when you fall out of balance. She used to say, it's a slippery slope down and it's a long walk back up.
I love that. It's a slippery slope down and a long walk back. I'm going to remember that. A long walk back. It is a long, and it can be sometimes a lonely walk back up. You're just trying to do it yourself, and
Absolutely.
it's not easy. And that's why
It's
community,
not
back to
always
community,
easy.
back to
Yeah.
community. I'm big on community. Just even tomorrow night, for example, I just know some friends in the neighborhood are needing some support. And I said, how about we just do yoga together, everyone, just let's meet 7 o'clock tomorrow. And I'm going to just do some very gentle breathing, moon salutations, keep it easy.
Amazing.
And honestly,
Amazing.
life is really busy, yet this is the important thing to do, is to continue to create community and continue to support
Yeah.
each other. And
Beautiful.
it's such a, and I feel like that service for me, it's something I can give. Why not if I can help, And I don't want to see those people in my clinic. Love them
Yeah.
dearly, but I'd rather see them
Yeah.
on the mat than in my clinic.
Exactly.
You know?
Trupti, you were just sharing earlier about your specialty with migraines, and I'm wondering, like, I know that a lot of people in our community suffer from that. I can think of at least two or three, just off the top of my head, who have mentioned on Zoom calls. I think it's kind of like what you were saying earlier, just the way that we live in our life is so stressful and go and um, but maybe you can say a few words about how you would approach treating migraine. I know that Tripti has an entire beautiful book which I would highly recommend to everybody, called The Mysterious Mind. Extremely clearly written, extremely beautiful, just a fantastic offering for people who suffer from pain. But I know that there are also some people in our community, like I mentioned, that struggle with that. So maybe a few words about how would Ayurveda approach pain, and specifically migraine pain in general.
Yes, and it was something that was what I wrote my paper on when I studied Ayurveda, because I was so fascinated with the process of migraine. And at that point, I'd already been practicing neurology when I went back into the Ayurvedic training. And so I said, let me just delve into the literature and see, what does, this 5,000-year-old science say about these attacks of pain? And the ancients had these attacks of pain. Hemicrania comes from half the head, because usually migraine's half of the head, and it's
All right.
so, yeah, the hemicrania, usually it's left side or right side. Usually one side is dominant. There's actually an Ayurvedic reason why we can get into if you'd like.
Oh,
And
cool.
then there's a reason for that. And then what happens is, and even before, I'll back up, the pain even is experienced, there are shifts happening, and as I mentioned, energetically, oftentimes one is moving in this vata, moving, going, doing. Life is not being followed in circadian alignment. Going to sleep
Right.
at different times, getting up at different times, skipping meals, traveling, eating foods at
Yeah.
different times. So that allows that wind energy, the neurons, to get excitable. And where does that excitability start? It starts in the gut. And Ayurveda is very clear about the gut-brain connection and the gut-brain link.
Right.
And to kind of touch on a little bit more the Western science about the gut, that is only confirming what Ayurveda said thousands of years ago, is that there's a neuropeptide, CGRP, that's actually made in the gut that augments in production when one is experiencing perceived stress. So
Wow.
if I feel I'm dehydrated and I'm experiencing stress, the hypothalamus is my kind of pacemaker for my thirst centers.
Right.
It may then signal the gut to make more CGRP, because, see, the hypothalamus is thinking, okay, if Tripti isn't drinking water, she's got to be running from a bear. She's got to be in danger, because why wouldn't she drink a glass of water? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
She's got to be in danger. And if I don't eat a meal, must be in danger again, because I didn't sit down and have lunch. It doesn't know that I chose to do work, or I chose to put my activity elsewhere.
Right.
And so what happens over time is that CGRP production goes up and up. The gut gets more and more imbalanced. And that's the first step of migraine, is actually perception of stress. And remember, there's also this sense of maybe I am reacting to something and holding on to an emotion more than I should, holding on
Yeah.
to anger, holding on to frustration, holding on to this anxiety, and I'm not really letting that clear. And that's why I love
Mhm.
yoga and breath work. It does allow us to clear some of that from the subtle body. But let's say, I'm busy and I've got too many things going on for me, and I continue to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate all of that energy of stress and emotion, and my gut gets more and more imbalanced. Boom, CGRP goes up and then eventually turns on the vagus, rest and relax nerve, but it activates then the brain, and specifically the trigeminal branches and the cervical branches. So neck pain and migraine, and depending on the
Yeah.
side, the migraine, and then the nausea comes out and light sensitivity. So, and that's where the pitta, the fiery part, comes, because pitta, fire, is linked to inflammation, CGRP.
Right. Right.
So Ayurveda in thousands of years ago, they always said this thousands of years ago, it's a vata pitta. Now, in neurology, only now, because when I started practicing migraine medicine 25 years ago, it was a vascular thing. It was the blood vessels, constricting, dilating. Oh,
Right.
wait, actually, it's a neurovascular. Neurons are getting excited. Oh, wait, now most recently, neurovascular inflammatory, meaning excitable brain is neuro, the excitable
Right.
neurons,
Right.
vascular, and then the inflammatory peptides, pitta. Ayurveda said thousands of years, it's a vata pitta imbalance.
Right.
Now we
Right.
have the science to prove it.
Sure.
And now we have, and I kept saying we needed something and to block the inflammatory peptides. And every time I
Yeah.
would recommend medications, and especially the narcotic meds that got often given, they weren't doing anything with the inflammatory, system. Now the new meds have come out that work that area.
Wow.
So
Very interesting.
that very interesting combination. Yeah.
I have two follow-up questions for you. One is that I feel like inflammation just in general, in my kind of experience of life, seems to be on the rise. Do you have any thoughts about where is that coming from? Like I feel like in my parents' generation, inflammatory diseases were more or less extremely uncommon. And now they seem to just be that basically almost everybody in society either knows somebody or suffers themselves. So what's changed? Do you have any sense of that from an Ayurvedic perspective? What's changed that's caused so much inflammation in our world?
Well, I think to understand the elements, the wind energy pushes on the fire. So if we're
Okay.
like wind blows on fire when you're at a campfire,
Yeah.
to
Sure.
augment the fire.
Yeah.
So when you're carrying excess wind, moving, going, doing, not respecting day and sun, staying up late to watch Netflix episodes, on your social media, constantly going, who needs to sit and enjoy a meal when we have conversations to be had, and we're drinking ice cold water, which is the worst thing you can do while you're eating, by the way. You're doing all these things. The wind energy, we don't have time, so many things to talk about. A lot of it's in the book, but I'll try to touch on as much as I can. But the reality is we start to build wind energy, and then the wind pushes the fire. So I think what's two things that are happening. Number one, there's excess wind that isn't being cleared like it was in the years past, because we didn't live as windy of a life. We weren't on technology as much. We weren't always going as much. We used to have a lot more off time where we didn't really do anything besides look at a tree. There's nothing else to do. But I was talking to a friend of mine. Like, I used to sit in my summers, sit outside on a tree. I still remember that tree. With a big tree. Just sit there and watch. I don't know what I was doing. For hours. I would just sit on this tree. Maybe a friend would come over once in a while. I mean, I would leave a message on a voicemail and say, "Hey, are you home?" And they wouldn't answer. And I'd sit there, maybe wait for them to come. A lot of downtime. Didn't have the phone, the internet technology. I tell my kids, they're like, "How did you live?" But you know what? I was then turning off the vata wind, wasn't I? Because I was resetting. So that's part one. Part two is now we're starting to realize even diseases like migraine, there is an inflammatory component. Cardiovascular, there's inflammatory. That's more science catching up to prove what the ancients have said about these disease states, because Ayurveda has always said it's a vata pitta. So it's not like it's a new thing. It's just now Western is discovering it. And now there's all these antibodies to block everything, So it's really kind of a time where we're more aware. Though the roots and the origins of yoga, Ayurveda, breath still will address these conditions, even if they seem to be perceived as different or novel or new, ideologies, let's say. Because in Ayurveda, nothing is, this is all ancient. It's been all
exactly. It's been happening for a long time. It's this was the extreme comment of my teacher. I don't know if you remember when um, who was kind of looking at very large cycles of time. I don't know if you remember when they discovered the God particle, or when they were thinking they were going to discover the God particle in science. I was sitting with my teacher in India, and he said, let's say they discover the God particle. They'll just forget about it in another few. Like in another few yugas, they'll have no memory of it at all. It's just like, wow, you're looking at a whole different span of time, aren't you?
Well, you are. It's so true, though. It's just, yeah, it's fascinating. And, I think as we try to keep things like really unique and interesting and cutting edge, come on, when you look at the ancient textbooks, it was all explained. It was
Definitely.
maybe we didn't take the time to interpret it because it was kind of complicated how it was explained. Yeah, this was all kind of said. Been there,
Absolutely.
done that.
Absolutely. So fun in a way, actually.
Yeah,
It's always at least reassuring to me in some level that it's all
yeah.
been worked out before. But Trupti, you were saying this thing about right and left, and there being a difference between right and left. Maybe I'm curious about that from a yogic standpoint, because I feel like we
Yeah.
talk so much in yoga about Irda and Pingala, and the kind of unification, and I feel like that's you could say, an important part of the yogic science, and I'm very
Yeah.
curious about how that relates to pain. And
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. I think with the right and left, I was most intrigued because as I was, studying Ayurveda, I started noticing that just in my own physical body, the only thing I really started noticing early on, I used to like to wear heels, okay? And this was before I was really practicing yoga. And practicing yoga, I started to pay more attention to my feet, started to look at my feet more, noticing, gosh, I started having a bunion on my left side. Why is my left side, So I started researching it as I learned more of the Ayurvedic wisdom. And what you realize is that in a similar fashion, Irda Pingala, when you look at the heating and the cooling aspects of us, the right is the fire energy side, and the left is more the cooling. So Vata individuals that are moving, going, doing, wind energy will accumulate on the left side of the body. The Pitta, fiery type individuals, will accumulate on the right side of the body. And so what you start to find is that based on Ayurvedic wisdom, this is where the energy tends to hold. And when you start to get that imbalance, you have to ask yourself, how am I being too Vata? What am I doing in my life that's inducing that state? How am I being too Pitta? What can I do to change that? And so when someone tells me that migraines are always on the right side, always right there, I start asking, and it's very interesting because sometimes I ask questions like, do you like spicy food? Yeah, I love spicy food. How do you know that? And it's not like I'm psychic or intuitive. I just was like, yeah, you just told me right side, and that's pitta. It's very clear, So it's kind of fun because you can when it comes to connecting and medicine, my goodness, us physicians, us providers, more than anything, really, especially because we're virtual oftentimes now because of Zoom and many people traveling in different places and having a hard time seeing doctors live. Empathy, compassion, connection, there's nothing more important than that. And so having this knowledge and having the connection like that, like, I get your pain, I understand where you're coming from. Now let's dig into that some more, and it's beautiful. Yeah, explained again thousands of years ago.
Wow. Amazing, amazing, amazing. So I have a question for you, but that I don't even really understand. So, and it is, what is the three brain model?
I threw that one. That one,
I'm,
saying, yeah, the three brain. What the heck? What am I talking?
I'm excited though. I feel like it's going to be good.
It's something. Well, this was okay. So here I was getting to the close of, pandemic starting. Almost 15 years of practice, clinical practice. And I thought, am I going to keep my clinic open during pandemic? And I started to think about the patients that have succeeded and what specifically I did for them that was most helpful, that got them to go from like chronic symptoms to like, really releasing their pain and discomfort, anxiety, stress issues. And as I thought about the protocols I was using, so I wanted to kind of understand and template it, and then say, if I close a clinic, at least I have this like toolkit I can give people, like do this, this, and this. There was a theme, and it was very straightforward, but yet kind of complicated when you go into it. But big picture, there was a theme. The patients that did well worked on their three brains. And I know as a neurologist, most people think, well, aren't you talking about the brain up here? And what are the other brains? And isn't that how we perceive the brain? Yes. In traditional training, the brain, the central nervous system, and the spinal cord is the brain. And that's the main, what we believe to be center that's guiding our systems, our functional being. Well, I've expanded that, and I'm just expanding it simply because of what I've seen in terms of really working to improve health, brain health, body health, mind health. First brain, I'll call it the central nervous system, the brain in our head, but I'll expand upon that and say it's not just the brain in terms of its operating center. It's how we think, how we perceive, how I perceive the world. What is my model of the world? And do I react to stress in a way that is not in harmony with me? And what is that program that I have, and where did I get it from? So first brain goes into that, and patients that started to explore their reactivity to stress and their first brain from that perspective started to actually shift and find that maybe their thoughts, actions, and words were not serving them. So first brain is there. Second brain is your enteric. It's your feeling brain. It's actually the 200 million neurons that are in the gut. Many have said that the enteric nervous system, the nervous system in the gut, is actually more vast and more complicated than the spinal cord. And that is where your neurotransmitters are made, your immune system is centered, and really the storage of your emotions, a gut feeling. And so in Ayurveda, it's really about connecting to the emotional body. I don't just talk about, are you constipated, but do you feel anxious? And is anxiety triggering the constipation? That's the feeling. Third brain is the microbiome. And what I noticed is people that worked on their thought patterns, their emotional body, and their microbiome, and it could be changing their diet, adding spices, maybe making sure they have lunch every day. Not everyone was doing all of this, but they were doing aspects of it. That was the group that got better. So what I'd say is you got to work on your three brains. And then if people are curious, I go deeper. And then that's kind of how that model evolved. And with my coaching, and even when I'm working in my medical model, I tend to tap into that. How is your second brain doing right now? How is your microbiome? How's your third brain doing? You know, what's kind of calling out for some attention? Where can we put our energy, and what tools do you want to use for that? And that to me has given some structure to this madness of a very complicated physiology.
Beautiful, beautiful. You know, it's something that it kind of broke across Devdas recently, that somebody was talking about their mind on a Zoom call, and it suddenly just occurred to me, yoga doesn't really have any concept of mind, and it definitely doesn't have any concept that your mind is located here.
Right, where is the mind? Who's doing thinking? Some would argue it's the bacteria that are actually in the gut, the 100 trillion bugs that actually help us think and feel and, emote,
So many elements to it, right? And I feel like just expanding your notion that it's not happening here, I feel like it's already a step in the right direction, right? It's just like some of us, I think we really believe that this is the kind of command and control center of everything that's happening. In terms of the people's microbiome, like, what do you suggest? Like, what would be some practical things that you would suggest for people to work on that?
Yeah. So the most important thing is to pay attention, to be mindful of your own digestive health. Starting every morning, do you wake up and eliminate? Is that elimination happening without any support from a cup of coffee or from movement around the house? And trying to just get into rhythm of your body naturally wanting to eliminate first thing in the morning is the first step in the right direction of a healthy digestion. And then after that, is the elimination easy? Is it, like they say, like a banana, like formed and easy? Or are you straining yourself? Are you feeling it's too loose? And maybe it changes with the full moon. Maybe it changes with what you've eaten. Pay attention. Step one is just being mindful. Then step two is if it's imbalanced, what can we do? How can we improve it? What can we add? And that's where it can go from yoga, breath, to foods, to natural herbals.
If someone is not in the rhythm of like waking up and eliminating, what would you suggest as a practical methodology for approaching that?
Yeah, and we always want to go a little bit step back and say, how are you sleeping? Because oftentimes the elimination may be from, back to my early story, for a poor night's sleep. So with the Western is like, fix it at that moment, like take a fiber capsule or drink this or take that. The Eastern is take a big holistic picture here. How are we doing overall? Are you too stressed at bedtime? Are you drinking something that's not good to drink, a glass of wine at bedtime? Are you
Yeah.
watching something really stressful at bedtime? You've got can go into
Yeah.
spasm. What's happening?
Yeah.
And then kind of working that direction. And yes, in the morning time, if one is having a hard time, doing wind relieving pose, doing some different things, using a squatty potty,
Beautiful.
hydration, that
Yeah.
all can help too. But I do want people to think back a little bit, not
Yeah.
start right there. Because if you do
Yeah.
all that and it's not working, it might be because the nighttime sleep pattern is
Yeah.
not healthy and good.
Yeah. And I also feel like what you said about the hydration is huge. Like, I feel people underestimate, like in the morning, how dehydrated, like, hydration is probably the first thing that your body actually wants in the morning. And most people start the morning with a cup of coffee, which is dehydrating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Vata, wind energy, it kind of holds in
Yeah.
things in, it creates constipation. It's a dry
Yeah.
state. So you need
Yeah.
even more water if you're very Vata imbalanced,
Right. Right.
It's even
Right.
more than a typical. Hmm.
Very interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Um, so amazing, 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 amazing adventures. Tripti, so grateful.
Thank you.
Can you share with us, like, something about? I know that you have. We already mentioned your amazing book, The Mysterious Mind, but it's worth mentioning again. But you also have another book coming. Can you tell us something about the books and where that came from and how that whole project came into being?
Yeah, I think the books in general come from a space of me being so grateful for all I've learned. And I've been
Beautiful.
grateful to have been able to absorb this information from so many incredible people. Oh, goodness. Over the years, I've
Mm,
had the opportunity to meet and speak and be in presence of really inspiring people. And
yeah.
I know it's hard to do that. And I've been in the space where
Yeah.
I'm grateful that I could do that. So if I could share this in a way where it wouldn't require as much time and effort and energy to be
Yeah.
out there and meeting and reading, that was the goal. That was the goal, is to
Beautiful.
condense the information and to take that ancient wisdom that can be tricky to understand and make it practical for all of
Yeah.
us. So book one
Beautiful.
is really, hey, here's Ayurveda in a nutshell. If you have migraines,
Yeah.
especially, just understand it and apply it. And
Hmm.
I actually, honestly did it because in clinic, I had patients that were coming back and doing follow-up appointment after follow. I was like, instead of you coming back and seeing me all the time, just read the book. And I bet you if
Yeah.
you read it, you won't even need me as often. And that's kind of what happened. I remember I had a new
Yeah.
patient who came in. She's like, I read your book. I actually don't even need you. I just stayed with the visit because I made the appointment 2 months ago. You're hard to get in with. And she, 2 month wait, she got in and she's like, I just kind of wanted to meet you. I don't really have anything to say. My migraines are gone. I was like, are you kidding me? It was so funny. Obviously, I didn't charge her for the visit. I said,
But
just leave.
that's back to
But it
what you
was,
said about the empathy, right? It's like you want
yeah.
they want the love.
I'm like,
Fantastic,
my
huh?
day. This is what my goal is, because
Yeah.
the goal is to
Yeah.
not need your provider. The goal is
Yeah.
to be your own healer and to understand what you need and use these tools to help yourself. I mean, I rarely see the
Mm,
doctor, knock on wood. I'm not against physicians, but I can figure myself out at this stage.
yeah.
So book
Yeah.
one was kind of like, here it is. And then book two was what I was missing. And book one was getting into the understanding of the mind, the programs, our thought patterns, how we view stress, and
Oh,
maybe how we
beautiful.
can change our view
Wow.
and our body's interpretation of stress so we
Wow.
don't carry it and create disease. So that's going to be about 3 or 4 months coming out. And the idea is really, again,
Wow.
to take all of this
I can't
information.
wait. Now I'm super excited when I
I
hear the
can't wait for
topic.
you
I
to.
feel like that's incredible. What a
There's a lot of
beautiful.
self-assessment in there. And the goal of the
Yeah.
self-assessment is because I just know, and God bless, but I know this isn't going to happen in the doctor's office. It just isn't, because this
Yeah.
information is a little bit too vast. And I'm kind of a geek and I love to study and read. I'm always going to conferences. And I just know it's really hard to get this information. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of self-assessment. So then when, the reading is done, you kind of get to know yourself.
Yeah.
And by the end, you're like, oh, now I get why I should be doing this, this, and this. Now I'm more committed to this practice and this belief system or
Beautiful.
this way of working. And so it's
Beautiful.
really, my offering of love that I just know everyone can heal
Yeah.
themselves in a way that's
Yeah.
far better than really most of us can offer as providers, you know?
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. And I feel like that's I mean, just, back to where we started in the very beginning, this thing of kind of like creating a stress body and a response to the world. It's like just knowing your thoughts and creating a little bit of separation and beginning to, journal and write down and know yourself a little bit from the inside. I feel like is such a powerful tool in your toolkit. Like then, you know, there's less tendency to to create that kind of persona, because you know a little bit about who you are, you know a little bit about your thoughts, you know a little bit, and you have a little bit of space. Like you're looking back from the perspective, and oh wow. But I feel like that's a very exciting new chapter, you could say, or new book.
It
Not
is.
new
It's a
chapter,
new
new book.
book. And I want to just share that there's some more that I've added, because I have a quiz on my website. And so for anyone
Yep.
that's just curious and wants to tap into this, like, who is my stress personality? Who shows up, and
Yeah.
what's the message behind that? There's a quiz on the website, Trupti Gokani MD. They can
Perfect.
take the quiz and learn their type, and just it starts the conversation going.
Yep.
And
Yep.
you start understanding. And what I'd even encourage, it gets kind of personal, but even maybe have someone that knows you well take the quiz for you, because
Oh
you
wow.
may see yourself a little different. That's a new thing I'm adding, Devdas, because you may see yourself differently than someone else does. There's a couple of digestive questions on the quiz, so it gets a little personal.
Yeah.
But for
Yeah.
the rest of the quiz, I think it's interesting to get a perspective
Yep.
and to say, okay, I see me this way, and my final calculation is this personality. You may be surprised. Someone will take the quiz for you and say, oh, you're more this. Do you notice that you did
Very
this, this, and this?
interesting.
So be
Very fun.
open and be
Yeah.
willing to learn if you take the quiz, because the
Yeah.
reality is
Yeah.
it's all about just getting deeper into your true self and being authentic and clearing that stress personality so that real you can come out and shine.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Guys, we'll all have the link for the quiz down below in the description. So check it out. And have a friend check it out also.
Yes.
I
You
love
never
this.
know who
I
you're
love
spending
this.
time with.
Yeah, I love this new element of it.
Yeah.
That's really fun. Wow.
And for some, I found, I'm just saying one thing with relationships is that you find that if someone in the partner says you're kind of, this is your energy, it's interesting the conversations that have emerged from this
Oh,
is,
I
well, do
believe
you
that. Yeah.
realize, you can only
Yeah.
imagine, when you request this and this from me, or we do this, that comes out, the personality comes out more.
Right.
So you
Right.
actually get deeper, not only understand yourself, but
Yeah.
understanding the people you spend time with, which, back to what we're saying, is who are you surrounding
Beautiful.
yourselves with? And how
Yeah.
can you all help each other be your best selves,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So inspiring and so exciting, Tripti. What a joy. I'm just, you know, this is kind of a step back here, but I feel like the reason why I'm excited about our podcast is actually not because of us. I'm excited about my podcast or our podcast, because I get to bring all of my favorite beings to share their wisdom and their joy and their insights. And um, every single time we've ever had the privilege to have you, it's just been such a joy in my heart. I'm very grateful for what you share, and I feel like, in my own life and in my own yoga journey, I'm sure but um, the kind of integration of East and West has been a kind of central component of my own heart story and my own heart's journey. And one thing that I love so much about your sharings is I feel like there's such a beautiful integration of the wisdom tradition of the East, but also to some degree the wisdom tradition of the West, right? It's like
Absolutely.
looking at the science, looking at why does that work, how does this affect us, being open to learn and grow in both models. And I feel like that integration is just so beautiful and so powerful, right? When we don't throw away what the ancients have said, but we don't throw away what science has said, and we find that kind of middle balance point in between where we're respecting both and honoring both. And I feel like that wisdom is so alive in your heart, this beautiful integration. So yeah,
Well,
full
thank you.
gratitude
And
as
and and
always.
this is why I love Hatha yoga. It's the polarities,
Yeah.
the sun, the moon, the balance, and bringing it all
Yeah.
into alignment. And if we can do
Yes.
that and bring this sense of cohesion and alignment within
Yeah.
ourselves and with these respected fields,
Yeah.
we can really operate at our highest self.
Tripti, so
Namaste.
inspiring.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for listening. So grateful to you, with us and the community of Akasha. Really
Beautiful.
incredible.
This was Wisdom in Motion with the Akasha family. Keep shining in the spirit of yoga. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Tripti.
Thank you. Be well, everyone.